So we're doing something a little bit different this tutorial. I'm showing you a fade to white sparkle effect, and you could trigger this off of basically anything. So clicking a portal, something else, you want to end a dream, and then boom, over whatever period of time that you want. So the way we got to start this is we first got to make sure that we have a post-process volume. And if you don't have a post-process volume in your scene, it's very quick and easy to add one. So come up here, search for post-process volume. And we got to set a few things on our post-process volume to make sure that this works. And you can also set other things in your post-process volume if you're doing other things on your post-process volume, but just make sure that when you go into Blueprint and you do the next step, that all the settings match. The minimum settings that you need are infinite extent, so make sure that this is checked, and that's going to ensure that all your post-process settings affect the entire scene. And there are two others. They all start with EV. It's this min and max EV. So I set this to -2 and 2. And what this does is it defines the maximum brightness and minimum brightness of your scene. So next we have to go into Blueprint and we have to set up what we need to actually make the fade to white sparkle effect. And you could do this on any blueprint, basically any trigger that you want this to occur on. But for the sake of this demonstration, I'm just going to do it on the third person character. So the first thing is we need to get a reference to our post-process volume. So I would do this on begin play. So at the end of this string, on event begin play, we need to get actor of class. And don't do get all actors of class because that's a lot more performance intensive. And you should only have a single post-process volume in your scene. You just search for post-process there, get it, and we'll promote that to a variable. And I'm going to rename that, just call it post-process ball. So now that we got a reference to our post-process volume, now we can change that. And what we're going to do is get that reference and we are going to set the settings. And this is an interesting thing where we can set any setting on our post-process volume. But in order to change those settings over some period of time, we need something that can change over time. And I'm going to add a timeline. And there are other ways of doing this, but I like timelines for any circumstance where it's a controlled amount of time where you're always changing it in that way. And I'm going to call this fade to white 10 seconds. And we'll go into that. We'll add a track, float track. I'm going to make our length 10 seconds. I'm going to rename our float track fade to white. And right click over here. We're going to add a key. I'm going to zoom out, come over to the right, add a key all the way at the end, change the time to 10 seconds, value of 1. These two arrows right here, they do a nice job of making sure our timeline takes up the entire screen. And then we can right click on our first key and auto tangent. What I found is that this effect looks a lot better if you scale it up fast. So move it more like that. Just make sure this doesn't go above 1 until all the way at the end. Compile and save that. Go back to event graph. So how do we connect this to this? So what we're going to do is we're going to make settings, make post-process settings. Now what's cool here is we can set any setting we want, but we're just going to do the bare minimum here. So if we search for EV, we get our minimum EV and max EV. We got to set those to -2 and 2 respectively. And looking back in your scene, if there are any other settings on this post-process volume that you've changed that are different than the default, you're going to need to also set those settings here on the make post-process settings. But there's 3 other settings at a minimum that we need to add to this in order to get the fade to white effect. And the first one is our bloom method. If you just search for method, you'll find it. And we can select that. And we're going to change this from standard to convolution. And it says fast Fourier, transform image based convolution intended for cinematics, too expensive for games. But we're really only doing this fade to white sparkle effect during our cinematic, a transition. So I think it's okay. And then the next thing we're going to search for is the word convolution, if I could spell, and select the min here and then the multiplier, not the max here, the multiplier. And then we can expand the make post-process settings. Okay, you'll see that the convolution boost min is 7 by default and this one's 15. So what we're going to do is we're going to drag out a pin from the first green pin and we're going to do a dash for minus, and it's going to be 7 minus. And we'll drag out a pin from the 15 here, and for this we'll do a plus sign, which is add, and this is going to be 15 plus. So basically what we're doing is we're starting with a default of 7 and a default of 15 here, and then it's going to change over some period of time based on this. But from this fade to white, I'm going to multiply this by 6.99. So very close to 7. Multiply by 6.99 and then boom. So as this goes from 0 to 1, this number is going to get closer and closer to 6.99, which is going to lower this overall convolution boost min. And then for the convolution boost multiplier, we get our fade to white here, and we're going to multiply by a big number. 10,000, over 9,000, 10,000, and connect this up down here. And last but not least, connect our update there and move this into position. Okay, so now that we got our timeline, we can call this really from any piece of functionality. So if the player character clicks on something and it's like a portal, then you can play this timeline and it fades to white. In my case, just for demonstration purposes, we are going to do keyboard U. And all we got to do is under components here in the bottom left, we got to get our fade to white 10 seconds and we have to play from start. Pressed, connect up just like that, and compile and save. We are ready to test this out. So play from here and go full screen. And then if you see the sparkles and you see them growing larger and brighter, then you've got it. So I hope this tutorial was helpful. And if you play around with other fade to white effects, because I've found some cool ones that you can do, not just this one, but feel free to post in the comments below if you come up with cool new fades.